Hey guys, tonight we drop you straight into the sun-baked heart of Athens, the so-called cradle of democracy, philosophy, and apparently chronic back pain. You've landed here not as some toga-wrapped demigod, but as an average citizen with cracked heels, morning breath, and a wife who's already yelling at you from another room. You jolt awake to the sound of a rooster crowing like it's being strangled by Plato himself. Your bed, if we can even call it that, is a threadbare mat tossed onto a cold stone floor. Your spine registers each groove in the rock. A single clay oil lamp flickers weakly in the corner, casting long shadows across the cramped room. There's no pillow, no blanket, just a rough wool tunic that you use to cover your legs during the night, now tangled around your ankles like a drunken octopus. The air smells of old ash, sweat, and the sour tang of dried goat cheese. You inhale deeply and immediately regret it. There's no glass window to let in light, only a wooden shutter that creaks open to reveal the blazing white glare of the Athenian sun bouncing off every marble surface in the city. Your eyes squint instinctively, not quite ready for the blinding day ahead. Your stomach growls like Cerberus. Breakfast. If you're lucky, there's a scrap of barley bread left from yesterday. More likely, it's just a cracked fig and a lump of something that might have once been cheese, but now tastes more like regret. No coffee, no eggs, no toast with avocado, just a dry, chewy existence and the vague taste of clay. You shuffle barefoot across the dusty floor, kicking aside a broken amphora that's been waiting to be fixed for the past 6 months. You step outside into the tiny courtyard you share with your extended family. A goat, 2 chickens, and at least one wandering philosopher who's fallen asleep on your bench again. His name's Theoktos. No one really knows where he lives. A woman brushes past you carrying a basket of laundry balanced expertly on her head. It's your wife, and she doesn't bother saying good morning. She mutters something about you being late again. You open your mouth to reply, but a swarm of flies takes that moment to investigate your face. And by the time you recover, she's already disappeared around the corner, leaving behind only the sharp scent of olive soap and judgment. You pull on your hymation, essentially a toga's crankier cousin. It's stiff, itchy, and has a rip that you keep forgetting to mend. There's no underwear, of course, and the sandals barely qualify as footwear. Just 2 leather strips and a prayer. As you head toward the Agora, you pass a group of children playing with clay figurines. One of them is trying to impersonate Pericles, complete with a fake nose and a very unflattering accent. The others collapse into laughter. Public ridicule is the national sport here. Right after political satire and drinking watered-down wine, on the way, you pass a man squatting by the wall doing his business in full view of the street. You politely avert your eyes. Public sanitation is, let's call it, aspirational. You've grown used to the smells of waste, wine, incense, and the occasional decaying offering left too long at the household shrine. A little further down, you get jostled by a fish seller pushing a wooden cart full of sardines, yelling about freshness while swatting flies with a bunch of leeks. The scent hits you like a philosophical paradox, at once familiar and disturbing. A crowd gathers outside a small bakery. You peek in, hopeful for something warm, but the baker tells you with a shrug that there's no bread left. Someone bribed him to hold a few loaves for the local strategos, an official who apparently thinks fairness is a foreign import, and you're still hungry. You sigh and continue trudging down the alley, your stomach still doing its best impression of an outraged citizen mid-debate. The sun is already high, baking the dusty streets until the air shimmers like it's had too much wine. A potter yells at you to watch where you're going. Turns out you stepped too close to his kiln, which has been running since dawn and smells like burnt figs and ambition. You stop briefly at a public fountain, hoping to splash some water on your face. It's tepid, vaguely metallic, and probably shared by 30 other people this morning, several of whom have just come from the gymnasium, nude, sweaty, and proud of it. You hesitate, then dunk your head in anyway. Hygiene is mostly about lowering your standards. You hear chanting in the distance, not religious, political. A group of men in dusty cloaks are already gathered at the Knicks, warming up for today's assembly. You groan. You forgot about the vote. Again, in Athens, being a citizen means more than owning land and speaking your mind. It means mandatory civic participation. You don't just get to have a democracy, you have to show up for it. Even if your tunic still smells like goat, you pick up your pace, dodging a priestess leading a slow-moving sacrificial cow toward the Acropolis. The cow looks about as thrilled as you feel. Around the corner, a group of old men argue loudly about naval policy. One of them swears the Spartans are secretly building ships using cursed lumber. The others nod sagely. Everyone in Athens is either a conspiracy theorist or an amateur admiral, sometimes both. Your path is briefly blocked by a cluster of tourists. Well, what passes for tourists in 5th century BCE? Bearded men from Ionia with elaborate cloaks and even more elaborate opinions. One of them points at a temple and mutters something dismissive about Doric columns. You resist the urge to push him into a cart of olives. Finally, the Agora opens before you, a sun-drenched expanse of chaos. Think farmer's market meets courtroom meets Twitter thread. You've barely taken 2 steps when someone shoves a rolled-up scroll into your hands. It's a political pamphlet likely accusing someone of misappropriating temple funds. You scan it briefly. The drawing of the accused looks suspiciously like your cousin. The Agora is crowded, noisy, and impossible to navigate. Someone selling garlands made of onions. Another is loudly reciting Homer for tips. And yet another is demonstrating a so-called portable urinal made from an amphora with a hole cut in the side. He swears it's a Dionysian invention. You do not investigate further. A man in fine robes bumps into you and tuts. You instinctively check your coin pouch. Still there for now. Pickpockets here are trained like Olympic athletes. You once saw a kid swipe a whole wheel of cheese without even breaking stride. You think about heading to the Stoa for some shade, but it's packed with philosophers debating whether justice is a form of balance or a glorified revenge plot. One of them is gesturing wildly with a pomegranate. You turn away before it becomes a weapon. Just then, someone calls your name. It's Cleon from next door. He's grinning and sweaty and holding a bundle of scrolls. "Did you forget jury duty again?" he shouts. You freeze because you absolutely did. In Athens, forgetting jury duty isn't just embarrassing, it's borderline treason. And you're not exactly eager to end your day sipping hemlock over a missed appointment. You force a smile, shout something vague about important errands, and duck into the nearest portico like a coward. A goat is already in there chewing on someone's tax records. Welcome to Athens. It's not even noon. The portico goat gives you a bored glance before returning to its paper lunch. You sigh, tug your hymation tighter around your shoulders, and step back into the brightness. If Athens had a weather forecast, it would be sun, dust, and aggressive pigeons every single day. And you're starting to smell like old olives. You head home, hoping to freshen up a little, or at least find a corner to breathe. Unfortunately, your home offers no such luxury. Athens is a city of impressive public buildings and temples, but the average home, let's just say rustic, would be generous. Your modest dwelling is a boxy little structure made of sun-baked mud bricks, wedged between your cousin's two noisy cousins and someone who brews fish sauce for a living. It's got one door, two windows you can't actually open, and a courtyard just big enough for a chicken to jog laps in. As you duck back inside, your eyes adjust to the dim, smoky light. The small hearth in the center is still smoldering from last night's cooking, some kind of lentil gruel that tried its best to become a meal and failed heroically. You cough as the ash tickles your throat and wave away the haze with your sleeve. Now it's time to change, or rather to shift into something slightly less awful. Your wardrobe consists of about 3 tunics, all in varying states of disrepair. You grab the least stiff one, sniff it, a mistake, and slide it over your head. It itches immediately, clinging to your sweaty back. A few tufts of unspun wool poke through the seams and make you look like you wrestled a sheep and lost. You reach for a belt, a simple rope that once held up a fishing net, and tie it around your waist. It keeps the tunic from flapping open at inopportune times, especially when climbing steps, sneezing, or attempting anything athletic. There are no undergarments, no socks, and definitely no deodorant. You try not to raise your arms too high. Your sandals, such as they are, consist of a few flattened leather straps barely clinging to a worn-out sole. You slip your feet in and wince as the right one rubs against a pebble embedded in the base. You make a mental note to fix it. You won't. In the corner, your wife is beating a rug with more force than necessary. She doesn't look at you. You know better than to ask what's wrong. She'll tell you eventually, and it'll involve your failure to replace a water jug that cracked during last week's earthquake. You were busy arguing with a neighbor about whether Ares or Athena would win in a foot race. It felt important at the time. From the side room, if you can call a pile of mats behind a curtain a room, comes the sound of rustling. One of the house slaves is waking up, likely preparing to fetch water or start the laundry. You murmur a half-hearted calamera, but it lands somewhere between guilt and exhaustion. You're still not used to giving orders to someone who's lived with your family longer than your youngest son. The air inside the house is dry and dusty. The walls are plain, decorated with only a couple of hand-painted tiles and a cracked oil lamp shaped like a lion's head. A lyre leans in the corner, missing 2 strings, its owner long since grown tired of fixing it. You consider cleaning yourself before stepping out again. There's a small basin in the courtyard filled with yesterday's wash water. It's cloudy and smells faintly of soap and feet. You splash your face, grimacing as the grit clings to your skin, and wonder for the 100th time why nobody has figured out indoor plumbing yet. Rome doesn't even exist as an empire, and already you're jealous. Then you remember that even public baths here are just shallow basins and awkward eye contact. You wipe your face on the corner of your tunic, which ironically only adds more dust, and step back inside. There's no mirror in your home, just a piece of burnished bronze you sometimes use to check if there's ash on your forehead. You glance at it now. Yep, still there. You swipe again and call it good enough. In Athens, grooming is more performance than hygiene. A bit of beard oil made from olive and thyme. Maybe a spritz of rose water if you're wealthy or pretending to be. But you run a hand through your hair, dislodge something that may have once been a fig, and call it done. It's not like anyone expects you to look like a statue of Apollo. Apollo doesn't have to haul grain. You hear a crash from the courtyard and step outside again, only to see your neighbor's goat, again staring at you with zero remorse from atop your wife's laundry pile. The goat's name is Mysticals, which is wildly inappropriate given how much he poops. You chase him off with a stick. He ambles 2 feet, then starts chewing your sandal lace. Back inside, your wife is now muttering to herself while pounding garlic with a stone pestle. She doesn't stop when you enter, just throws a glance that says, "I dare you to comment on the garlic." You don't. The home feels tight, cluttered, lived in, and it is. Generations pile on top of one another in small Athenian households. Your parents probably lived here before you. Your children may do the same. There's no moving out at 18. There's just the slow accumulation of people and smells. You trip over a loom in the corner. Again, it's never moved. You still forget it's there. In a rare act of domestic courage, you attempt to tidy up the family shrine, a small soot-covered altar to Hestia tucked beside the hearth. You adjust the olive branch, wipe away some ash, and replace the dried fig offering with a newer, less terrifying fig. You whisper a quick prayer for patience and maybe better sandals. Suddenly, your son bolts in from the street, breathless and covered in dust. He's babbling about a wrestling match he saw in the gymnasium. You ask who won. He says, "The guy with one eye and no teeth." You nod, a classic underdog. He plops down on the floor and starts carving little hoplite soldiers out of clay. He's surprisingly good. You wonder if there's a future in that. Maybe he'll be a sculptor. Maybe he'll get drafted and lose all his teeth like today's gym champ. Life in Athens can turn on a knuckle. There's no fireplace to sit by, no comfy chairs to lounge in. You perch on a low stool and try to eat a stale crust of bread you found behind a jar of pickled onions. It snaps in half like a roof tile. You chew anyway. Your wife eyes you from the kitchen corner, clearly judging your ability to consume ancient building materials. Then, as if the gods were trying to spice things up, a traveling peddler passes by your open doorway, shouting, "Soap good for men, women, and offending odor." You and your wife both pause. You glance at her. She glances at you. You both glance toward the money jar. Empty again. She sighs, wipes her hands, and mutters, "At least the goat doesn't need soap." It's hard to argue. You finally stand, adjust your tunic, and take a deep breath that fills your lungs with dust, garlic, and the faint smell of goat pee. Time to go be a citizen. The city buzzes with voices as you make your way toward your modest home again, not for rest, but for another round in the daily domestic theater of Athens. You've barely set foot across the threshold when you're greeted by the sharp clatter of clay hitting stone. One of your wife's storage jars is tipped over. She's already muttering under her breath, sweeping the floor with brisk, angry strokes. She doesn't look up when you enter. You clear your throat. Nothing. You mention the Agora. Still nothing. Finally, you bring up the fact that you tried to chase off Mysticals, the goat. Her hand freezes mid-sweep. He was in the laundry again. She hisses. "That goat has seen more of my chitons than you have." You're about to reply, but decide not to pick that battle before dinner. You step into the central room. The ceiling is low, the walls plastered with whitewash that's already peeling. Household life in Athens isn't the private cushioned retreat you'd find in future centuries. This isn't Rome with its mosaics and courtyards of luxury. It's loud, smoky, filled with a constant thrum of labor. A toddler, not yours, runs past, shrieking. You have no idea where he came from, possibly your neighbors, possibly from the underworld. You step around him carefully, ducking into the storage room where your wife keeps her jars of lentils, olive oil, and an emergency stash of raisins she thinks you don't know about. The room is cooler, darker, and slightly less chaotic. You take a moment to breathe, and then a sharp voice from behind. The grain's gone bad. It's your wife again, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. You didn't secure the lid. Now we have weevils. Do you want to eat weevils? You open your mouth, she continues. You already forgot jury duty. Don't pretend to know about grain. You mumble an apology, then step aside so she can inspect the damage. She pulls back the cloth on the jar and grimaces. You do too. One of the weevils waves at you cheerfully. Household roles are clear in Athens. Public life is yours. Private life, hers. But the boundaries blur when things go wrong. You know she handles most of the house's economic matters quietly and with more skill than she gets credit for. She knows you'll probably mess up again tomorrow. This is your version of affection. From the kitchen space, a glorified alcove with a blackened ceiling and 3 cooking pots, comes the sound of boiling lentils. You realize you forgot to collect firewood this morning. You offer to go now. Your wife raises one eyebrow. You do not go. Outside, a slave is scrubbing laundry in a large basin, humming under her breath. Her fingers are cracked from the soap. You nod to her. She doesn't look up. Another is grinding barley into flour using a heavy stone. The rhythmic scrape is oddly soothing. These women work from before dawn until long after you collapse in exhaustion. And yet, they're never mentioned at the assembly, never included in the city's grand ideals. A pot clatters in the courtyard. The toddler shrieks again and someone shouts. You're suddenly very aware that the home you rule is actually held together by everyone except you. You return inside and sit on a low stool staring at the floor. The cracks in the plaster look like a map of all your regrets. You wonder if Socrates ever had to clean up weevils. Your stool creaks under your weight. Or maybe it's just protesting your inaction. Either way, you take it as a sign to make yourself slightly useful. You wander into the side storeroom where the water jugs are kept, half of them chipped, the others growing a suspicious film. You lift one and nearly throw your back out. You'd ask for help, but the house slaves are already overworked, and your wife would probably remind you she's not in the business of fixing your spine. There's a strange dignity to how everything barely functions, but still continues. The wood creaks, the dust settles, the beans boil. Life carries on in this little square of the city, one cracked amphora at a time. You head back into the central room, where your wife has now begun chopping onions with the intensity of a woman who has many opinions and no interest in sharing them with you. She pauses only to yell through the window at the neighbor's boy who is once again throwing pebbles at your fig tree. You try to take control of the situation by shouting too, but your voice cracks mid-scold. The boy laughs. Your wife rolls her eyes. Suddenly, the door creaks open and your cousin Mel walks in without knocking. He smells like vinegar and gossip. Did you hear? He starts already plopping down on the nearest stool and helping himself to a fig. Aristophanes is writing another comedy. This one has a talking sausage. You blink. About what? No idea. Probably politics or love or sausages. He's brilliant. You wonder, not for the first time, how comedians get away with mocking every powerful man in the city while regular folks like you get fined for stepping on a temple shadow during festival season. Life in Athens has rules, but they seem to bend depending on who's doing the bending. As if summoned by divine timing, your wife appears with a bowl of boiled lentils, 2 olives, and a hunk of barley bread that could be used in battle. She places it in front of you with the air of someone handing over a sentence, not a meal. You thank her quietly. Mel offers to trade his fig for your olive. You accept. You eat in silence for a while, listening to the street noise drift in. There's laughter, someone playing a flute off key, the distant bark of a dog, probably chasing a philosopher again. The city breathes like a living thing, loud, sweaty, and very opinionated. Mel finally gets up, brushes crumbs from his tunic, and announces he's off to the Stoa to see what the thinkers are arguing about today, which probably means he's going to eavesdrop on someone getting publicly humiliated by a 13-year-old prodigy quoting Hesiod. After he leaves, you look around at your home. It's not much. The walls are thin. The roof leaks during winter, and the floor is cold enough to give you arthritis before 30. But it holds your family and your failures and the faint flickering hope that maybe your son won't inherit your sandals. Your wife finally sits. Her shoulders slump. She looks at you for the first time today, not with anger, but with that tired kind of understanding that only grows between people who've shared too many cramped summers and burned dinners. You offer her the last olive. She takes it, and for a moment there's peace. You step out into the midday sun again, this time with a mission. Fulfill your sacred duty as an Athenian citizen, or at least pretend you remember how to get to the Knicks without getting lost in a sea of olives and stray dogs. The air is heavy with heat, and your tunic is already sticking to places it has no business sticking. The city's alive with motion. Traders shout from beneath their awnings, promising the finest lentils this side of Delphi, while pickpockets drift quietly between distracted philosophers. You pass a street musician playing a poorly tuned lyre and singing a tune about an old general who got drunk and mistook a statue for his wife. You hum along, it's catchy. The Knicks, that famous rocky hill where the assembly gathers, looms ahead. It's not grand, just a slab of exposed rock with a simple speaker platform and stone benches carved into the slope. But here, in this open-air arena of sweaty men yelling over each other, the fragile miracle of direct democracy takes place. Every male citizen over the age of 18 can speak. Not everyone can shout loud enough to be heard, but that's a separate issue. As you approach, a man with a stick jabs you lightly in the ribs. Quickly now, he grunts, or you'll miss the vote. You recognize the red cloak slung over his shoulder. He's a Scythian archer, a kind of ancient riot control unit. Their job, make sure you don't skip your civic duty. And if you do, they'll smack you with a rope dipped in red paint. That way, everyone can see you didn't show up and shame you accordingly. You pick up your pace. You squeeze into the growing crowd. Already hundreds of men are packed into the Knicks, tunics flapping, tempers rising. You smell sweat, fish, and ambition. The speaker, some silver-tongued orator with more confidence than soap, is mid-sentence. And if we do not fund the shipyards, what will become of our naval superiority? Shall we ask Sparta for lessons in swimming? The crowd roars with laughter. A few Spartans near the edge of the crowd grumble. You find a spot near a grizzled man with one sandal and a vine tattoo crawling up his neck. He nods at you and hands over a grape. No words exchanged, just two citizens sharing sunstroke and disappointment in government. Next up is a younger man with neatly oiled curls and a voice that hits octaves only dogs should hear. He argues against spending on war, suggesting instead more funding for public baths. Our cleanliness, he shouts, is the truest sign of our civilization. The tattooed man beside you mutters. He's just trying to get women to notice him. You stifle a laugh, then realize, wait, there are no women here, not even peeking from behind the rocks. That's right. As a citizen, you get the privilege of participation. But your wife, your mother, your intelligent, terrifyingly efficient spouse, banned. The very democracy you're so proud of is a club with a very strict guest list. Your turn to speak will never come, partly because you're too far back, partly because you're terrified. You once tried to ask a question at an assembly and accidentally called the city's general a wet sandal. You've never recovered socially. Still, you're here. And for the rest of the afternoon, you'll nod solemnly, pretend to understand naval budgets, and clap when others clap. It's not about influence, it's about presence. In Athens, just being there means you matter. even if no one hears your voice. The speeches go on and on. One man quotes Homer with unnecessary flair. Another waves a wooden model of a trireme in the air for emphasis and nearly clocks the man next to him. You can't help but marvel at the absurdity. Democracy in action, where anyone can speak so long as they speak loudly, poetically, and ideally with a bit of theater. You shift your weight, trying not to fall asleep in the sun. The man beside you is asleep, mouth open, snoring like a cyclops with hay fever. A Scythian archer walks by, raises an eyebrow, and gives him a quick jab with the blunt end of his bow. No sleeping through the future of Athens. Your stomach growls again. You wonder if they'll break for lunch. They never do. Voting might be sacred, but apparently so is collective hunger. Someone passes around a pouch of dried figs. You take one, chew thoughtfully, and try to imagine a world where the assembly has an agenda shorter than 20 speakers. That world is not today. Suddenly, a hush falls over the crowd. A familiar figure steps up onto the speaker's bema. A well-fed merchant named Democritos. He starts shouting about a recent shipment of grain that was definitely not diverted from state stores to his private warehouse. The crowd stirs. You hear muttering behind you. The name Democritos and the word bribery are getting dangerously cozy. Then someone tosses a fish head at him. It misses barely. The Scythian archers look bored but ready. You start to slide away, hoping no one mistakes you for one of his cousins. You're not probably. This is democracy in Athens, equal parts civic pride, food fight, and public theater. And yet, despite the chaos, there's something thrilling about it. These men, for all their ego and sweat, are deciding the future of the city with their voices. It's messy. It's loud, but it's real. Then a man near the front shouts a motion to exile a political rival. Ostracism, the Athenian version of cancel culture, but with actual pottery shards and the risk of getting kicked out of the city for 10 years. You watch as people begin scratching names onto broken bits of pottery called ostraca. One man drops his and curses as it shatters into dust. A boy nearby offers him a fresh one. The vote goes ahead. The name that appears most out. No appeal, no trial, just pack your sandals and go. You clutch your own ostracon, unsure whose name to write. Your hand hovers. The man behind you whispers, "Don't write mine." You freeze. Is he joking? You don't turn around to find out. You scribble a name at random, hopefully not your fishmonger's or your landlord's. After the vote, the crowd begins to thin. Some linger to argue further. Others head to the Agora to brag about their rhetorical prowess or lie about how loudly they cheered. You, on the other hand, are dripping with sweat and anxiety. You head downhill with the masses, your sandals slipping slightly on the smooth stone path. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks. A pair of boys run past laughing, one wearing a makeshift laurel crown and yelling, "I banish you." And just like that, democracy has spoken. Whether you understood what it said is another matter. By the time you reach the Agora again, your brain feels like it's been sun-dried and gently pounded with a philosophical mallet. You've survived the assembly, barely. And now all you want is something to eat that doesn't involve figs or lentils. The bustling heart of Athens beckons with promises of grilled fish, fresh bread, and maybe even a stolen olive or two. The Agora is even louder now. It's not just a marketplace, it's the gossip center, courthouse, news station, and general arena for public humiliation, all rolled into one. Stone porticos shade the perimeter, but the center is chaos. Stalls are crammed together like jealous neighbors, each vendor shouting louder than the next, each smell competing with the others for nose dominance. You pass a woman selling garlands who eyes your dusty tunic with a wrinkled frown and mutters, "Not worth the flowers." You pretend not to hear. Just ahead, a man juggles amphorae while reciting lines from Euripides badly. He drops one, it shatters, and he bows like it was part of the act. No one claps. You duck into a quieter alley where the food stalls cluster. A fishmonger waves a very dead eel in your direction. "Caught it this morning," he claims. The smell says otherwise. You sidestep and find a man selling roasted chickpeas. That's more your speed. You hand over 2 O-balls and receive a tiny pouch of crunchy salvation. As you munch, a boy tugs on your tunic. "You want good wine," he whispers, holding out a jug with a broken seal and a wink. You wave him off. The last time you took that deal, you spent 2 days convinced your sandals were on fire. You stop at a stall with fresh barley loaves stacked high and still warm. You ask the price. The seller, an old man with only one eyebrow and a surprising number of rings, smiles. 6 obols. You laugh. That's more than a chicken. He leans in. "Chickens don't smell this good, friend." He's not wrong. Reluctantly, you hand over the coins. As you turn to leave, someone bumps into you hard. You stumble, drop your loaf, and immediately feel a hand brush against your hip. You twist, but the pickpocket's already vanished into the crowd along with your coin pouch. You stare down at the bread in your hand, the last purchase you could afford, and sigh. At least they left that much. Just then, a loud voice cuts through the chaos. "Make way!" The trial begins. A crowd rushes past, following 2 men flanked by officials. One of them is gesturing wildly toward a sack on the ground. "What's the charge?" someone yells. "Killing a sacred olive tree," comes the answer. You blink. Yep, that's a real crime. In Athens, damaging or destroying one of the city's protected olive trees, believed to be gifts from Athena herself, is an offense so serious it can result in exile or worse. You recall the time your cousin tried to prune one and ended up in a week-long public shaming ritual involving a goat, a bucket of paint, and a poem. The accused man swears he didn't do it. The tree fell naturally, he says. The crowd isn't convinced. Someone yells, "Check his axe." Another shouts, "Bring the tree." It's about to get weird. You join the onlookers, not because you care, but because in Athens, nothing says community bonding like watching a man try to explain to 501 jurors why his gardening mistake shouldn't ruin his life. The makeshift court forms right in the middle of the Agora, as it often does. Because why bother with courtrooms when you've got benches, shade, and half the population ready to judge at a moment's notice? You find yourself in the rear of the crowd, balancing your barley loaf like a prize. Up front, the accused is already sweating through his tunic. His name's Lysandros, and while you don't know him personally, you do know his reputation for accidentally letting his goats chew on civic property. The prosecution is a sharp-nosed man in a spotless white himation, clearly someone who's never carried a grain sack in his life. He holds up a splintered branch with dramatic flair. "This," he says, "is what remains of our city's sacred inheritance." Gasps ripple through the crowd. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. The Heliaia, the jury, all 501 men strong, sits in a semicircle with wooden tokens in hand. They'll cast their votes with small discs, one for guilt, one for innocence. Both look nearly identical, except for a tiny nub in the center, and yet somehow, despite the primitive system, everyone treats the verdict like divine will. A slave boy with a loud voice begins reading a list of witness names. Most of them are neighbors. One of them is a goat. Someone near you snorts. The prosecution calls the first witness a cranky old man with suspiciously few teeth and too many opinions. He claims to have seen Lysandros at the tree with an axe at dawn. The defendant claims he was relieving himself nearby and may have tripped. The jury murmurs. You're not sure which detail offends them more, the disrespect to a sacred tree or to basic bodily dignity. The trial drags on. People argue, point fingers, and refer to obscure verses of Solon's laws like their gospel. A philosopher wanders by and starts quoting Heraclitus about the nature of trees. No one asks him to stop. Eventually, he does, mostly because someone hits him with a pebble. You try to leave discreetly, but the crowd closes in. It's decision time. Jurors begin casting their tokens into a pair of amphorae, one for guilty, one for not guilty. The tension in the air is thick enough to slice with a bronze dagger. A priestess lights a small offering of incense nearby. You sneeze. The verdict comes in. Guilty. Lysandros groans and drops to his knees. His punishment, not exile, but a hefty fine. The loss of his voting rights for 1 year and hilariously mandatory tree planting duty. The crowd disperses, already forgetting about him, already scanning the Agora for the next bit of spectacle. You glance at your loaf of bread and realize it's gone. Someone swiped it during the trial. Of course they did. You sigh and head toward the edge of the Agora where a few quiet stalls remain. Traders selling charms, cheap wine, and miracle remedies that are almost certainly crushed seashells and goat spit. A woman tries to sell you a love potion. You ask if it works on barley loaves. She blinks. You move on. Somewhere nearby, a pair of men are debating the ethics of laughing at a goat trial. You think about joining them, but your feet are tired, your stomach's empty again, and frankly, you don't have the energy to defend satire as a civic virtue. You find a stone bench and sit. For a moment, there's peace. Then you hear someone shout, "Trial of the chicken thief starts in 10 minutes. Athens never sleeps. It just yells a lot. After losing your bread to the invisible hand of Athenian mischief, and possibly a literal hand with very sticky fingers, you decide it's time for one more attempt at lunch. You turn toward the far end of the Agora, where a mix of permanent stalls and pop-up booths line the shaded colonnade. It's less chaotic over here, but only slightly. A group of men are arguing about whether fish taste better when fried in olive oil or goat fat. You wisely say nothing. You wander past a merchant selling clay figurines of gods with exaggerated anatomy. He catches your eye and winks. "For fertility," he says. You pretend you didn't hear and veer hard left into the produce section. There, behind a stall stacked with dates and half-wilted leeks, you spot Salvation, a plump fig tart sitting all alone on a wooden tray. It glistens under the sunlight like a promise. You reach for it just as someone slaps your hand away. "2 obols," the vendor says sharply. You search your belt instinctively, forgetting again that your coin pouch was stolen back near the barley incident. You offer the vendor a sheepish grin and the last of your dignity. He grunts. "Come back when you're less poor." So you do what every hungry, mildly desperate citizen does. You head toward your friend, Mystios, a man who's always good for either a favor or a philosophical guilt trip. You find him reclining on a stone bench under the shade of a fig tree, nibbling on almonds like a man who's never once missed lunch in his life. You approach cautiously. "Any chance you've got food?" He doesn't look at you. "Have you got a story worth the price of almonds?" You blink. "I watched a man get convicted for killing an olive tree." He looks up interested. "Did the tree testify?" You get an almond. Mystios is what people kindly call a market character. Less kindly, a professional loiterer. He never buys anything, yet somehow always has snacks. He claims it's the reward of cultivating charm. Others suspect he just never leaves. You sit beside him, chewing slowly. The almond is dry and mildly bitter, but to your empty stomach, it tastes like a Dionysian feast. Tell me, Mystios says between bites, do you ever feel like the Agora is just a test? You raise an eyebrow, like the gods are watching, judging, seeing which of us steals, which of us cheats, and which of us mistakes fish sauce for perfume. You stare at him. That happened once, he says. To me, a difficult week. You both fall silent, watching the crowd. Traders bicker, customers haggle. A street performer starts juggling small amphorae. Someone yells as one crashes and spills what looks suspiciously like fermented turnip juice. Mystios sighs. The marketplace isn't just where we buy things, you know. It's where we perform. You look around. He's not wrong. The Agora isn't just the economic heart of Athens. It's its social stage. Every deal, every accusation, every trial and scam and speech, it all unfolds in public. There's no such thing as privacy. Not here, not ever. Even lunch is performance art. A familiar voice calls out in the distance. Philosophy debates. Noon sharp. Mystios groans. Great. Another boy genius ready to tell me I don't exist. He hands you one last almond. You'll need your strength. You follow Mystios toward the edge of the Agora where a crowd has already begun forming. The philosophy debates are as much entertainment as intellectual sparring. Half wrestling match, half poetic roast session. The speakers perch on a raised stone platform, sun bouncing off their foreheads, confidence gleaming brighter than their sandals. You spot a group of teens lounging nearby, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Athens raises its philosophers young. One of them, no older than 16, is already warming up by quoting Heraclitus while simultaneously flipping a coin. The crowd murmurs in appreciation. You feel a pit of dread. Mystios nudges you. Go on. Ask a question. You blink. Me? You've survived a stolen lunch, a sacred tree trial, and a goat with no respect for property lines. You've earned your moment. You shake your head. Last time I asked a question, I confused Palamedes with a baker and got laughed off the steps. He grins. Then you'll fit right in. Before you can escape, a young speaker spots you. You there, citizen with the limp sandal, care to debate the nature of truth? The crowd chuckles. You freeze. Do you accept? Do you run? You nod awkwardly. Excellent, the youth says, dramatically adjusting his chiton. Tell us then, what is just? You panic. Your mouth opens before your brain catches up, just as when my wife lets me eat the last olive without comment. Silence. Then laughter. Not cruel laughter. Laughter of recognition. Someone in the back shouts, "The man speaks wisdom." Another chimes in, "He's lived." The young speaker tilts his head. Not bad, a household philosopher. You exhale. You're not winning, but you're not being pelted with figs either. You'll take it. The debate continues with sharp jabs and sly winks. One speaker proposes that wealth is a kind of slavery, prompting a grocer to shout, "Then chain me to a vineyard." Someone else suggests democracy is just organized noise, and Mystios murmurs, "Well, he's not wrong." Eventually, the crowd disperses, minds half changed, egos half bruised. The debates don't settle anything. They never do. But that's the point. In Athens, it's not about finding answers. It's about proving you care enough to wrestle with the questions, ideally while wearing a respectable tunic and avoiding metaphors involving goats. As you stroll back toward the center of the Agora, you feel different. Not victorious, not enlightened, just included. In a city obsessed with thought, The act of trying to think out loud is a kind of citizenship. You glance at Mystios. He's already wandered off, probably in search of another almond donor. You, however, are on a mission. You spot a vendor with honeyed pastries and head over. Any chance? You ask. You trade for wisdom. The man snorts. Not unless your wisdom comes with 2 obols. You nod, step back, and keep moving. Your stomach growls, but your pride is oddly satisfied. As the sun begins its slow descent and the shadows stretch across the marble, you pause and take in the Agora one last time today. It's loud, smelly, unfair, glorious, and absurd. And somehow you've survived it. You shuffle toward the shaded stoa, hoping for a breeze. But what you find instead is another battlefield. This one fought with words sharper than any Spartan spear. Philosophers have claimed the colonnade as their arena, and the atmosphere hums with intellectual bravado. Voices overlap in a storm of rhetoric, men in dusty cloaks tossing questions like javelins, youths heckling from the sidelines, and the occasional dog snoring at someone's feet, unimpressed by humanity's pursuit of truth. You think about slipping past, but it's impossible. The moment you set foot on the marble, a wiry teenager with ink-stained fingers points at you like an accuser at trial. "You there?" he announces. "What is courage?" The crowd turns. You freeze. Last time this happened, you tried to answer a question about justice and ended up comparing it to lentil stew. You still get mocked in your neighborhood for that one. "Courage," you stammer, "is showing up to jury duty when you know you'll be bored for 6 hours. Laughter ripples through the group. A man with a thick beard strokes his chin thoughtfully. "Interesting," he says, "the courage of endurance." He then spends the next 5 minutes expanding on your offhand joke like it's divine revelation. You want to interrupt, but he's already built a metaphor involving ships, storms, and the stubbornness of donkeys. Another voice cuts in. "Wrong. Courage is in action, not patience. Ask any soldier." He slaps his neighbor on the back, nearly knocking him into a pillar. The argument escalates. Soon, half the crowd is shouting about courage, while the other half argues over the definition of donkey. You edge backward, but a man in a patched cloak catches you by the wrist. "Stay, friend. This is where Athens breathes." His eyes glint with fervor. You nod politely while scanning for escape routes. As the shouting crescendos, someone invokes Socrates' name like a trump card. The crowd groans. They've heard this before. A thin boy with a squeaky voice pipes up, mocking the older men by asking if wisdom is like cheese, better when aged or rotten if left too long. The crowd erupts in laughter. A few scholars glare. You almost feel sorry for them, losing to a kid whose beard hasn't even sprouted. You sidle toward the edge, trying to blend in with a group of loafers, pretending to listen. One of them mutters, "Half these men debate truth. The other half debate lunch." You snort, forgetting you're supposed to be invisible. A dozen heads swivel your way. "What do you say, citizen?" someone demands. You shrug. Lunch is more urgent. Truth can wait until tomorrow. The Agora explodes with laughter again. Someone pats your shoulder. Another shouts. Finally, a philosopher with sense. You're not sure if it's a compliment or an insult. Probably both. The crowd begins to disperse, still arguing, still laughing, still carrying scraps of your clumsy words as if they were seeds for tomorrow's debates. You shake your head. You never meant to join the game. But Athens doesn't care about intentions. It pulls you in, chews you up, and spits you back out, smelling of sweat and irony. And the worst part, you'll probably be back tomorrow. You step away from the stoa, cheeks flushed from the accidental spotlight. The voices behind you keep rising and falling like waves, each man convinced he's cracked the code of existence. But in truth, you just feel roasted, gently skewered by a pack of teenagers who think quoting Heraclitus counts as sport. Athens is relentless that way. You can't even cross the square without being turned into a footnote in someone's argument. You wander toward the fountain, hoping to wash the taste of embarrassment out of your mouth. The water's lukewarm, slightly gritty, but refreshing enough. As you bend to splash your face, two men nearby are arguing so loudly it echoes off the marble. If virtue is teachable, one shouts, "Then why is my son still an idiot?" His opponent bellows back, "Because you taught him." A crowd forms instantly. You edge away before they recruit you as a witness. The Agora is thinning now. Merchants pack up, philosophers migrate toward symposiums, and the shadows lengthen across the flagstones. You sit on a low wall watching a group of youths practicing speeches. One kid, voice cracking, recites a passage about justice being the harmony of the soul. His friends heckle him mercilessly. You can't help but chuckle until one of them turns, points, and yells, "What about you? What's justice?" You freeze again. This time, you take a deep breath and answer slowly. Justice is when the neighbor's goat stays out of my laundry. Laughter ripples through the group. A boy claps his hands. Finally, a philosopher of the people. They crown you with a wreath of onion tops scavenged from the market floor. It stinks, but you can't deny it feels like an honor. As you wear your fragrant crown, you remember a story you once heard that the great Solon himself supposedly disguised laws inside poetry so people would actually listen. Maybe Athens has always blurred the line between wisdom and theater. Maybe the point isn't to find truth, but to keep the city buzzing with questions, jokes, and the occasional insult involving donkeys. Still, your pride smarts. You wanted to slip past unnoticed, yet here you are, officially the onion philosopher. That nickname will probably follow you home. When the debates finally sputter out, the crowd scatters into the evening haze. Some head to drink watered wine, others to plot lawsuits, still others to scribble plays, mocking both. You stand, adjusting your crown, and head slowly down the road. Your sandals scrape the stones. The smell of grilled fish drifts from a tavern, making your stomach ache with longing. You can't help but laugh to yourself. Athens may have invented democracy, philosophy, and theater, but mostly it's invented ways to make you look foolish in front of strangers. And somehow you're still standing. Barely. By the time you trudge back toward home, the sun is already leaning west, slanting shadows across the dusty alleys. You half expect the house to be empty, but no. Your wife is there, standing in the courtyard with her arms folded and an expression that could curdle milk. She's been waiting and she has questions. Where were you? She snaps before you've even crossed the threshold. You mumble something about the assembly, the trial, the marketplace, the philosophy debates, and maybe a stolen loaf of bread. She narrows her eyes. So in other words, everywhere but here, you sigh. This is the delicate dance of an Athenian marriage. In public, your voice counts. In private, hers rules. You're supposed to be the Kyrios, the master of the household. But in practice, the woman who keeps the food stored, the loom spinning, the slaves working, and the neighbors from setting your laundry on fire, holds more real power than any assembly speech. She doesn't waste time reminding you of this. The water jars are empty, the loom broke. And someone, she eyes you pointedly, forgot to mend the crack in the roof tiles. You rub your temples. You've survived philosophers, jurors, and pickpockets today, but none of them wield judgment like your wife. In Athens, women can't vote, hold office, or even wander the Agora without raising eyebrows. Officially, they're invisible in public life. But here, inside the cramped walls of home, she is the economy, the logistics officer, and the family's chief strategist. You'd be lost without her. You know it. She knows it. And she will absolutely remind you of it every chance she gets. You try to deflect by asking about dinner. She laughs without humor. Dinner? The goat ate the onions, the barley's gone stale, and the slave girl cut her hand grinding grain. She pauses. But yes, there's dinner. You'll eat it, and you'll thank me. You nod because what else can you do? You shuffle toward the hearth while she returns to mending a torn tunic with sharp, precise stitches. She doesn't look at you, but she doesn't need to. The clack of her needle is commentary enough. From the corner, your son pipes up with a question about Homer. He wants to know if Helen was really worth launching 1,000 ships. Your wife answers before you can, snorting. She wasn't worth even one. Men just needed an excuse. The boy giggles. You cough into your hand, partly to hide a laugh, partly to avoid admitting she's probably right. The house is alive again, voices clattering pots, the rhythmic scrape of the slave boy refilling the water jar, and through it all, your wife moving like the quiet axis around which this chaos spins. You're supposed to be the citizen, the man of Athens, the one whose voice shapes the city. But in this house, you're just another body trying not to trip over the loom. Later that evening, as the sky deepens into a burnt orange haze, you sit in the courtyard, chewing on a crust of barley bread that could probably double as a roofing tile. Your wife has managed somehow to spin disaster into sustenance again. A stew bubbles over the hearth, mostly lentils, a few herbs, and one suspiciously chewy chunk of goat meat that she insists came from the neighbor's generosity. You don't ask questions. In Athens, plausible deniability is a survival skill. She sits opposite you, weaving at the loom by lamplight, her hands moving so fast you wonder if Athena herself is whispering over her shoulder. You watch her work, the flicker of the flame painting sharp angles across her face. This is the paradox. Officially, she has no voice in the assembly, no place in the jury, no say in the city's decisions. And yet, here in your home, her word is law. Your son runs past holding a clay soldier, making whooshing noises. He trips on the uneven stones and bursts into laughter instead of tears. Your wife doesn't even glance up, just mutters. He'll be braver than his father. You swallow your bread carefully. That one stings. The slaves move quietly in the background, finishing chores. One girl sets out an oil lamp while another sweeps the courtyard. They're younger than you expected, barely more than teenagers. And though they're silent, you can feel their resentment like smoke in the air. You know they dream of freedom, of slipping away during the night towards some imagined better life. You also know Athens doesn't make escape easy, yet their quiet persistence is its own kind of rebellion. You catch the eye of one, and for a second, you see more weariness than fear. Your wife coughs, drawing your attention back. She sets aside the loom, leans forward, and fixes you with that piercing look again. Tell me, she says, what did Athens achieve today while I fixed the roof, stopped the goat, and kept us fed? You hesitate. The assembly voted on naval funding. Some man was fined for killing an olive tree, and you were crowned the onion philosopher by a pack of snickering boys. None of that sounds impressive when said aloud. So you settle for, we argued loudly, she snorts. That's what men call politics. She gets up to stir the stew, muttering something about how even Aristotle would starve if left alone for a week. As the night deepens, the household settles. Your son dozes on a mat. The slaves retreat to their corner, whispering in low tones. Your wife blows out one of the lamps, leaving just a single flame flickering by the hearth. You sit in the shadows, listening to the rhythm of the loom, the bubbling of stew. the quiet hum of a home held together by her invisible labor. You think about tomorrow. More debates, more shouting, more posturing in the assembly. And you realize, not for the first time, that while Athens is built on marble, warships, and clever speeches, it really survives on the patience of women like her, women who will never stand at the Knicks but whose work and wit keep the city alive all the same. She catches you staring. "What?" she asks, suspicious. You shake your head. "Nothing, just thank you." She smirks faintly, then ladles stew into a bowl and slides it toward you. "Eat. Tomorrow you'll embarrass yourself again, and you'll need the strength, and you do as you're told." Morning drags itself back into Athens like an overworked mule, and you're already awake, rubbing grit from your eyes. The courtyard smells faintly of last night's lentil stew mixed with damp earth and smoke from the neighbors' fires. You try to slip outside quietly, but the sound of a broom scraping stone reminds you. The household is already alive, and not everyone is thrilled about it. One of the household slaves is hunched over in the corner, sweeping ash into a basket. Her tunic is thin and frayed, her hair tied back with a strip of rag. She doesn't look up. Another crouches by the basin, scrubbing yesterday's laundry with cracked red knuckles. She hums softly, though the song is half drowned by the splash of water. Their labor is constant, invisible, and entirely expected. No one claps when the hearth is warm or the jars are full. That's their job. At least that's how the city would phrase it. You clear your throat, testing authority in your own home. "The jars need refilling today," you say, gesturing toward the cracked amphora by the wall. The girl at the basin doesn't move. She keeps scrubbing. Finally, she glances at you, then back at the cloth, her silence as sharp as any insult. Your command has landed with the impact of a pebble tossed at the Parthenon. You cough. Soon, you add, weaker this time. She doesn't nod. She doesn't need to. You feel the heat of her defiance anyway. It's not open rebellion. Athens punishes that brutally, but it's a reminder. These are not robots. These are people forced into lives they didn't choose, and sometimes their resistance comes in the form of doing nothing at all. Your wife appears holding a spindle of wool. She raises an eyebrow at the awkward silence. "What's the problem?" she asks flatly. You mutter something about the jars. She snorts. "Then carry one yourself." And just like that, your authority collapses into a pile of dust finer than the sweepings on the floor. Outside, you can hear the city waking, merchants dragging carts, priests chanting at shrines, a donkey braying like it has an opinion on naval policy. You take a step toward the door, eager to escape the heavy air, but one of the slaves suddenly straightens and says loud enough for you to hear, "Why should Athena care about us? We carry water all day, and still the citizens pray for more." You freeze. That's not just back talk. That's dangerous talk. Impiety is a charge that can ruin a man's life. You glance toward your wife, but she's already walked away, muttering something about men being cowards in their own homes. The slaves go back to work, leaving you alone with the echo of those words. The truth settles uncomfortably in your stomach. Your entire household, the foundation of your daily survival, rests on people who owe you nothing but obedience, and some days not even that. You're a citizen in Athens, master of your domain. And yet, here in your own courtyard, your authority feels as fragile as a clay pot waiting to crack. You step into the courtyard again, trying to shake off the sting of being ignored in your own house. The morning light glances off the amphorae lined against the wall, each one empty and waiting. You pick one up, heavier than it looks, and for a fleeting moment you consider hauling it yourself. But your pride stops you. Isn't that what citizens have slaves for? That's what every man in the assembly would say. And yet, when the girl's eyes slide past you with quiet defiance, you feel the illusion of control slipping like sand through your fingers. Your son scurries out with his clay soldiers, oblivious to the tension. He sets them up on the dusty ground, lining them in a neat phalanx. Then he looks up at the laundry slave and says, "Which one should lead the charge?" She pauses, a basket balanced on her hip, then points at the smallest figurine, the one with a chipped helmet. The boy beams. For him, she isn't a slave. She's just another adult in the house who occasionally humors his games. You envy his innocence, even as you know it won't last. The girl with the water jars finally moves toward the door, muttering under her breath. You catch a word. Freedom. It lands heavier than the amphora she carries. You glance around nervously, checking the courtyard walls as if they might be listening. In Athens, talk of rebellion isn't just scandalous, it's lethal. And yet, what can you do? Whip her? Hand her over to the magistrates? That would solve nothing. You know this, and perhaps she does too. Your wife re-enters, holding a spindle of wool, her hands moving with practiced ease. "Don't glower," she says without looking at you. She still carried the jar, didn't she? You want to argue, but you don't because she's right. Authority here isn't about fear or even law. It's about the daily dance of need and resentment, compromise and survival. You depend on them more than you'd ever admit in public. A memory surfaces, a neighbor whose slaves ran off together one night. He boasted in the assembly the next morning about discipline, but everyone knew he slept with a dagger under his pillow for weeks afterward. Athens loves to pretend its empire rests on marble and warships. But you've lived close enough to see the cracks. It rests on backs like theirs, backs that sometimes straighten when you least expect it. Your wife sets down the spindle and finally meets your gaze. "Try living one day without them," she says evenly. "See how long your fine citizenship lasts." She turns away before you can respond, leaving the loom clicking softly in her wake. You slump onto a stool, feeling smaller than you did facing 1,000 citizens at the Knicks. Outside, the city roars to life, full of speeches and markets and battles of wit. But here, in your own house, the battle is quieter and far more humbling. You stare at the doorway where the slave disappeared with her jar and wonder if she'll come back. She always has, but each time it feels less like certainty and more like borrowed luck. By midday, the sun is a blazing coin hammered straight onto your shoulders, and your sandals drag across the stones as you head toward the gymnasium. Everyone goes there sooner or later. It's where men of Athens exercise, gossip, and pretend to cultivate virtue while mostly just comparing muscles. You're not exactly in peak condition, but skipping would draw more mockery than showing up looking like a wilted olive branch. The gymnasium isn't just a building. It's an open courtyard, dusty and crowded, lined with columns that provide more shade for spectators than participants. The first thing that hits you is the smell, sweat, oil, and ambition thick enough to choke on. Naked men spar in the center, grappling until they collapse into the dust, while others stand nearby, rubbing themselves down with olive oil like gleaming statues of hubris. You glance down at your own soft belly and sigh. A slave approaches with a small bronze scraper called a strigil. He gestures for you to oil up before joining in. You hesitate. There's something profoundly humiliating about standing there unclothed while an attendant smears olive oil over your shoulders, but it's standard practice. You try not to make eye contact with anyone, which is difficult because everyone else seems to have no such shame. The training master, a burly man missing half an ear, barks instructions. Wrestling pairs to the left, runners to the track, javelins by the wall, and no poetry near the discus this time. He glares at a group of youths giggling in the corner, one of whom is already composing a verse about oiled thighs and heroic throws. You're shoved toward the wrestling pit before you can protest. The dust clings instantly to your skin, mixing with the oil into a paste that feels both slippery and abrasive. Your opponent is a farmer with arms like tree trunks and a grin that suggests he enjoys this far too much. He lunges, grabs you around the waist, and slams you into the dirt with all the grace of a falling amphora. The crowd laughs. You wheeze, you scramble back to your feet trying to remember something about balance and leverage, but your body is more concerned with survival. You attempt to counter-grapple and manage only to smear more dust on his chest. He lifts you like a sack of barley and dumps you again. This time you stay down, coughing. The trainer shakes his head. Pathetic. He waves you off to the side where losers sit and contemplate their choices. You brush yourself off, cheeks burning. Nearby, a young man recites a Homeric line about Achilles' strength while flexing unnecessarily. You mutter under your breath. Achilles didn't have to work tomorrow. Nobody laughs. Eventually, you make your way to the track, thinking perhaps running will be easier. Spoiler, it's not. The ground is uneven. Your sandals slip, and your lungs feel like they're filled with hot coals after a single lap. The younger men sprint effortlessly past, their laughter echoing in your ears as you stagger to a halt. A slave hands you a sponge soaked in water. You drink greedily, ignoring the taste of clay. Everywhere you look, the gymnasium reminds you of what Athens expects from its citizens. Not just speeches, not just votes, but bodies capable of war, naked, oiled, and ready for Sparta. You, meanwhile, are ready for a nap, but you're not done yet. The trainer bellows for everyone to gather near the javelins. Apparently, it's time to prove your aim. The javelin field is a strip of trampled dirt lined with splintered wooden poles, most of them crooked from too many near misses. A pile of spears lies nearby, their shafts slick with sweat from countless hands. You pick one up. It's longer than you are tall, heavier than it looks, and immediately feels like a bad idea. The trainer barks. Grip firm, step forward, throw straight. Then he demonstrates with casual precision, sending his spear whistling across the yard until it lands with a satisfying thunk into the earth. The crowd applauds. You adjust your grip nervously. Your turn. He snaps. You take a breath, stagger a step, and hurl. The javelin wobbles like a drunk sailor, veers wildly, and lands 10 feet away in a pathetic puff of dust. Someone laughs so hard they nearly choke. A boy shouts. He throws like a fishmonger, swatting flies. You want to disappear into the dirt. The trainer pinches the bridge of his nose. At least you didn't stab yourself. Next. You slink away toward the edge of the field, grateful to be forgotten. A pair of men nearby begin practicing discus throws, but they have already turned it into poetry hour, reciting verses about circles symbolizing eternity. One man flings his discus with flourish, only for it to crash into a water jug. Applause erupts anyway. Athens doesn't always reward accuracy. Sometimes enthusiasm is enough. At last comes the final humiliation, stripping off the oil and dust. Everyone queues near the scraping area where slaves wield bronze strigils to peel the mixture from their skin. The sound is oddly satisfying, like someone carving cheese off a wheel, but it feels less noble when it's your turn. The slave drags the scraper down your arm, leaving behind a slick line of grime. He doesn't hide his grimace. You feel like a neglected amphora being degunked for reuse. Buckets of water are poured over your head. The cold shock makes you yelp, earning another round of chuckles. You grab a scrap of linen to dry off, only to find it smells faintly of old garlic. Typical. You leave the gymnasium aching, humiliated, but oddly lighter. For all its brutality, there's something communal in this ritual. Every man reduced to sweat, dirt, and laughter. It's Athens reminding you that citizenship isn't just debates and jury duty. It's also enduring public embarrassment with grace, or in your case, with a wince and a limp sandal. As you limp back toward the Agora, you pass a shrine to Hermes, where someone has left a small offering of figs. Your stomach growls. You consider it. Then you remember the trial about killing an olive tree and decide not to risk divine litigation over stolen fruit. Instead, you trudge home, your body sore, your pride bruised, and your hair still dripping. Tomorrow, no doubt someone will bring up your tragic javelin throw at the assembly. In Athens, humiliation travels faster than trade ships, and you'll smile weakly. Pretend it was funny and carry on. Because surviving here is less about strength or wisdom and more about learning to laugh when the city laughs at you. Your sandals scrape along the dusty road as you make your way toward a shaded courtyard where the sound of chanting drifts like bees in the summer air. This isn't the assembly, and it isn't the gymnasium. It's the school, a place where Athens forges its next generation of thinkers, poets, and politicians. You're not a boy anymore, but curiosity and perhaps masochism drags you inside. The space is simple. A rectangular courtyard lined with rough benches, a wax tablet propped on each. A group of boys sit cross-legged, chanting lines of Homer in sing-song voices, their words rising and falling like waves on the Aegean. The master, a thin man with a beard like wiry straw, stalks among them, correcting their intonation with sharp taps of a reed stick. You settle awkwardly near the back, earning a few suspicious glances. Adults aren't unusual here, but they're expected to pay, or at least pretend they're learning. You pull a scrap of wax tablet from your pouch and hope nobody notices the faint doodles of goats already carved into it. The boys recite a line from the Iliad, something about Achilles' rage. Their voices overlap, some rushing ahead, others lagging. The master claps sharply until they fall in sync. He nods, satisfied. Then he points to a younger boy. Translate. The child, no older than 10, launches into a polished explanation of the verse, complete with a metaphor about storms and spears. You gape. You're twice his age, and the last metaphor you produced involved onions. A teenager lounging near the doorway smirks at you. "Citizen," he says loudly, "can you offer your own interpretation?" The class turns. You feel sweat bead under your tunic. You try to stall with a cough, then mumble. Achilles was angry because someone stole his barley loaf. Laughter explodes. The master raps his reed against the floor, not unkindly, but enough to mark you as the day's comic relief. You sink lower on the bench. A boy whispers something about barley philosophy, and the entire row snickers. You flash back to the onion crown, the javelin disaster, the olive tree trial. In Athens, humiliation isn't just common, it's practically an extracurricular subject. The master clears his throat, steering the lesson back on track. He scribbles symbols onto a wax tablet, explaining how letters shape thought, how rhythm sharpens memory. The boys repeat after him, some with solemnity, others with the distracted air of kids dreaming about wrestling matches or figs. From your corner, you notice something odd, a tiny scrap of papyrus pinned to the wall with rough twine. On it, written in a careful hand, is a list of numbers arranged like a puzzle. The older boys whisper about it. "Pythagoras," one hisses reverently, as if the name itself carries power. "You've heard of him. Some eccentric from Samos obsessed with triangles. Rumor says he wouldn't eat beans." Strange, man. The boys dive into arithmetic. scratching numbers onto wax with their styly. You try to follow, but the numbers twist in your head until they look more like goats again. One boy notices your confusion and smirks. "Citizen," he says, "would you like us to explain slowly?" You force a grin, but inside, you're crumbling. Athens reveres knowledge, and here you are outsmarted by children who can rattle off epic poetry before breakfast. The laughter dies down, but the sting lingers. You stare at your wax tablet, carving absent-minded lines with your stylus, wishing you could sink into the stone floor. Around you, the boys chant another round of Homer, their voices sharp and steady. Each syllable feels like a reminder that in Athens, even children can wield words like spears, and yours are bent, rusty, and dull. The master notices your sulk and strides over, his reed stick tapping against his palm. He eyes your scratches and snorts. "Goats," he says flatly. The class erupts again, but then unexpectedly he waves the laughter down. "At least he wrote something," he adds, raising an eyebrow at a boy who's been napping against the wall. The boy jolts awake, blushes, and is promptly smacked on the head with the reed. You take a small, hollow victory. The master shifts the lesson to music. A slave appears with a battered lyre, strings loose and buzzing. He passes it to one of the boys, who plucks a clean, resonant tune that fills the courtyard. The master nods in approval. Another boy sings along, his voice cracking but sweet, carrying the story of Odysseus as if it happened yesterday. You close your eyes, listening. For a moment, humiliation fades, replaced by the raw beauty of song passed down through generations. Then the master gestures toward you. Play. Your stomach drops. You fumble with the lyre, fingers stiff and clumsy. The first note squeals like a dying rooster. The second isn't much better. The boys collapse into laughter again, one falling off his bench in delight. You grimace, strum harder, and accidentally snap a string. The sound twangs through the courtyard like Zeus cracking a whip. The master sighs. You're not a musician. He takes the lyre back, retuning the strings with a flick of his fingers. You slump on the bench, cheeks burning, wondering why you ever thought stepping into a classroom would be safe. The truth is plain. Athens runs on knowledge as much as it does olives or ships, and you, despite all your civic rights, are hopelessly unprepared for its intellectual hunger. As the lesson winds down, the boys gather their tablets and styli, chattering about the afternoon's wrestling match or the next poetry recitation. They barely notice you slip out the courtyard gate. You step back into the blinding sun, the chatter fading behind you, and feel the weight of the city's expectations pressing on your shoulders. In the assembly, you're drowned out by louder voices. In the gymnasium, you're flattened by stronger bodies. And here in the school, even the children have bested you. You sigh and begin walking, the dust rising around your ankles. Your mind wanders to tonight, when at least wine will dull the shame. Perhaps at a symposium, your fumbling words won't matter as much. Perhaps for now, though, you trudge forward, humming a crooked tune on the breathless hope that no one will remember the goat philosopher with the broken lyre. Spoiler, they definitely will. By the time the sun dips low and the streets of Athens glow with the last streaks of orange, you've already resigned yourself to the inevitable. You've been invited to a symposium. It sounds elegant, doesn't it? Like an evening of civilized chatter and refined philosophy. In reality, it's dinner with a side of drunken chaos, equal parts intellectual marathon, and frat party with better poetry. You arrive at your host's house, a merchant with more money than subtlety. The doorway's draped with garlands, and a slave splashes perfumed water onto your hands as you enter. The air's heavy with incense, wine, and the faint tang of roasted meat. A lyre twangs in the background, accompanied by a flute that's already slightly off-key. Inside, couches line the walls of the andron, the men's dining room. Guests recline sideways, propped on cushions, sandals already tossed aside. A slave brings you to your spot, wedged between two men who both look like they haven't stopped talking since the Persian Wars. You ease yourself onto the couch awkwardly, nearly tipping over your neighbor's wine jug in the process. He scowls, off to a great start. The meal begins. Bread dipped in honey, olives glistening in bowls, cuts of pork roasted until they drip with fat. For once, you actually eat something satisfying. You tear into bread, lick your fingers, and wash it down with wine that's been watered, as tradition demands. 1 part wine, 3 parts water. It keeps conversation lively without too many bodies toppling over before dessert, but the food is only half the point. A symposium is really about conversation, or more accurately, competition. Each man takes turns launching into speeches, jokes, or philosophical musings. One boasts about his military campaigns, another recites Homer until you want to shove olives in your ears. A young man with perfect curls offers a scandalous story about a politician's affair, and the room erupts with laughter. Your turn comes faster than expected. The host claps your shoulder and says, "Tell us something wise, citizen." All eyes land on you, and your stomach knots tighter than a fisherman's net. You take a breath, search your mind for something, anything, and blurt out, "Wisdom is knowing when to stop drinking before you insult your host." A pause, then laughter. Relief floods you as men slap their thighs and raise their cups. The host chuckles, though he narrows his eyes as if to say, "Be careful." The wine keeps flowing. Cups are refilled by nimble slaves, each pour accompanied by more boasting and more reckless jokes. Someone breaks into a song about Zeus disguising himself as a swan, which dissolves into giggles when a drunk man starts flapping his arms. Another begins a mock debate on whether figs or pomegranates make better lovers. You try not to picture either. Gradually, the mood shifts. Bellies full, minds fogged, men grow bolder, the jokes bite harder. The philosophy turns personal. Someone takes a jab at you for your patched tunic. Someone else mocks your javelin throw from earlier at the gymnasium. The laughter stings this time. You raise your cup to hide your face, but the wine only sharpens the burn. And then, like a cloud drifting across the moon, a single voice asks the question that chills the room. But tell me, friends, what is the true purpose of life? The chatter falters. Cups are lowered, eyes turn serious. The symposium has entered its dangerous phase, and you're sitting right in the middle of it. The question lingers in the smoky air like incense gone sour. What is the true purpose of life? A dozen pairs of eyes dart around the room, some eager, some weary. You know this game. Philosophy hour at the symposium isn't optional. It's the main event. You sip your watered wine slowly, praying someone else answers first. Of course, it's the man with the perfect curls who speaks up. "The purpose of life," he declares, reclining as if already immortal, "is to be remembered, to leave behind words, deeds, and children that will outlast us all." He smirks, clearly imagining marble statues of himself dotting the Agora. The older men murmur approval. Easy answer. Safe. Then another man interrupts, wine sloshing from his cup. "No, no, no. Life's purpose is pleasure. Why else are we lying on couches drinking the gods' nectar and eating honeyed pork?" He punctuates his point with a belch. Half the room laughs, the other half glares. The host raises a hand and, "What says our quiet friend?" His eyes land on you. You nearly choke on your sip of wine. Of course it comes back to you. You scramble for words. Think, you mutter. Maybe. The purpose of life is just to survive long enough not to regret the last olive. There's silence, then unexpectedly applause. It's not thunderous, but a ripple of chuckles and nods. A drunk guest points and says, "At least he's honest." The tension breaks. The conversation spins outward again, some arguing about glory, others about love, and at least one man ranting that beans hold the secret to the cosmos. But the undercurrent has shifted. You feel it. Athens prides itself on free speech, but free speech here is more of a tightrope. Say something too bold, too critical of the gods or the state, and you could find yourself standing in court accused of impiety. Everyone remembers what happened to men like Anaxagoras, daring to suggest the sun was just a rock on fire. Dangerous words echo far. Wine dulls your caution. You almost say something reckless about democracy being just a shouting contest, but you bite your tongue. A man across from you didn't bite his. He makes a joke about Athena preferring Sparta's discipline. The room freezes. That's the kind of comment that can follow you home. He laughs nervously, backpedals, but you can see the calculation in others' eyes. Words here are arrows, and sometimes they draw blood days later. As the night drags on, conversation dissolves into slurred songs. Someone demands a drinking contest. Another passes around figs dipped in honey, and the flute player screeches so badly that a guest stuffs bread into the instrument. Laughter returns, spilling out into the courtyard. You recline on your cushion, eyelids heavy, stomach full, head buzzing. For a moment, you let yourself drift. The symposium is absurd, indulgent, dangerous, and yet it's Athens in miniature. Loud voices competing, fragile egos clashing, truth and nonsense blending until no one remembers which was which. A slave leans over to refill your cup again. You wave him off, finally learning the most important purpose of life in Athens, knowing when to stop drinking. The morning after, the symposium greets you with the subtlety of a Spartan war horn. Your head throbs like a drum. Your mouth tastes of sour wine and stale olives, and the sun pierces through the shutter cracks like a spear aimed directly at your eyeballs. You groan and roll off the couch, only to land on a floor littered with broken cups, wilted garlands, and one very confused rooster that somehow wandered in during the night. You shuffle outside for air, hoping to clear your head. Instead, you're greeted by the sound of raised voices in the street. A group of men are pointing fingers, shouting accusations about some insult uttered at last night's symposium. You shrink back instinctively. Words here have a way of traveling faster than ships with favorable winds, and in Athens, careless speech can cost you everything. You try to slip past unnoticed, but a neighbor spots you. "Careful, friend," he says grimly. "They're filing a charge of impiety." A man mocked the gods last night. His eyes scan you suspiciously, as if checking whether you might be the accused. Impiety? The word lands heavy. In Athens, it's not a trivial charge. Mock the city's sacred rituals, disrespect the gods, or even just cast doubt on their power, and you can find yourself hauled before a jury of hundreds. If convicted, punishments range from steep fines to exile, or in infamous cases, death. The gods may be invisible, but their authority is carved into every law and every temple. You remember the philosopher who muttered yesterday about the sun being nothing more than a glowing stone? People laughed then, but if the wrong ears had heard, that kind of remark could unravel a life. And everyone knows what happened to men like Socrates, dragged into court, accused of corrupting the youth with questions too sharp for comfort. The men in the street are already debating penalties. One insists exile is too lenient. Another suggests a public flogging. A third demands the ultimate execution by hemlock. All for a joke made after too much wine. Your stomach knots. You replay your own words from last night. Did you say anything dangerous? You remember your olive joke, your muttered line about surviving democracy, and wince. At the time, it felt clever. Now it feels like evidence. You duck back inside, hoping to hide, but your wife is already waiting with folded arms. "What did you say at that symposium?" she demands. You stammer. She glares. "If I see jurors at our door, you'll be explaining yourself alone." She turns back to her loom, muttering something about men's tongues being worse than goats. You collapse onto the stool, rubbing your temples. The headache isn't just wine now. It's fear. Athens thrives on speech, but it also polices it ruthlessly. Every word is a wager, every joke a risk. And unlike the Symposium, there's no garland or song to soften the verdict when the city decides you've gone too far. You try to shake off the dread, but the city doesn't let you forget. By mid-morning, you're pulled toward the Agora again, where a crowd has already gathered around a magistrate reading charges. The accused is a young man, pale and trembling, his voice lost in the din of jeers. You push closer and hear the word that makes your chest tighten: impiety. The accusations tumble out. He questioned whether sacrifices actually please the gods. He muttered that thunder might be natural, not Zeus's temper tantrum. Worst of all, someone swears he laughed during a procession. Laughed. You glance around at the crowd. Some nod with outrage. Others look uneasy, but no one dares defend him too loudly. You whisper to the man next to you, "Is this really worth exile?" He snorts. Exile if he's lucky. You've seen what happens. You have. The name of Socrates drifts like smoke over every whisper about impiety. Still fresh in people's minds. Still a warning. The magistrate announces the case will go to jury. A sea of citizens cheers, hungry for the spectacle. Athens is addicted to trials. Some people gamble on them like sporting events, placing bets on guilt before the first speech is given. As the crowd disperses, a man you vaguely recognize sidles up to you. He leans close and mutters, "Careful what you say in public, friend. I heard your joke about olives at the Symposium. Your blood runs cold. Was he serious? Was he threatening you?" He smirks faintly, then drifts back into the crowd, leaving you with sweat pooling down your spine. You imagine it standing before 500 jurors trying to explain why a dumb remark over watered wine doesn't mean you've offended Athena herself. You picture your wife's expression, half fury, half "I told you so," and you see the end of it all, your name scrolled on ostraca, your life narrowed to exile, or worse, the bitter taste of hemlock. You stumble away from the Agora, mind spinning. Every word feels like a liability now. You keep your mouth shut. Even when a fisher tries to shortchange you, you let it go. Better cheated than charged. At home, you sit quietly in the corner while your wife weaves, her eyes flicking toward you like daggers. "Say less," she advises dryly without looking up. Athens has no patience for clever tongues. Outside, the shouts of the city continue. Men debating, boys mocking, vendors shouting. Athens runs on voices. But you're suddenly aware that your own might be the most dangerous tool you carry. You sip water, tasting dust, and wonder how long you can survive in a city where silence is safer than speech. Yet speech is demanded at every turn. The streets of Athens hum as usual, but beneath the noise there's a darker rhythm, a cough that won't stop echoing through the alleys. At first, you think it's just dust, or maybe the wine from last night souring in your throat, but then you notice it everywhere. Men doubled over, women fanning themselves with pale faces, children lying listless in courtyards. The air feels heavy, foul, as if the gods themselves are exhaling rot. The plague has arrived, you hear the whispers. It crept in with ships from the Piraeus, hidden among grain sacks and sailors' breath. Nobody saw it coming. And now it spreads faster than gossip at a symposium. You see the signs. Skin flushed, eyes glazed, fevers burning hotter than the summer sun. Victims stumble through the streets begging the gods. Their pleas met with silence. You hurry home, heart pounding. Your wife meets you at the doorway, her face tight. "The neighbor's son collapsed this morning," she says quietly. You glance past her and notice she's already moved your family's water jars away from the shared well. No one touches it until I say so. Inside, the house feels smaller than ever. The slaves whisper in the corner, their fear barely contained. They've seen this before. Slaves often catch sickness first, crammed together in tighter quarters. One of them mutters about Apollo's wrath, another about bad air drifting from the marshes. You don't correct them. No one knows the truth, and everyone's desperate for answers. That night, the coughing begins next door. You hear it through the thin walls, a rattle that doesn't stop until dawn. The sound seeps into your dreams, twisting them into visions of burning temples and rivers choked with bodies. You wake sweating, throat raw, wondering if it's just nerves or the first sign. In the Agora the next morning, the scene is chaos. Merchants hawk herbs as miracle cures. Priests wave incense until their arms ache. And philosophers, never ones to miss an opportunity, argue loudly over whether the gods or bad hygiene are to blame. Meanwhile, families drag the sick on makeshift litters, searching desperately for help that doesn't exist. You pass a man leaning against a wall, his eyes sunken, his breath shallow. He reaches out a trembling hand and croaks. Water. You freeze. You want to help, but fear grips your chest. Touching him might mean carrying the plague home. For a moment, your entire citizenship, your so-called Athenian pride, collapses into raw survival. You drop your gaze and walk on. The guilt tastes bitter, but fear is stronger. Back at home, you find your wife has barricaded the courtyard with spare planks. "No visitors," she declares. "Not until this passes." You nod, too shaken to argue. You look at your son, still playing with clay soldiers, blissfully unaware of the invisible enemy crawling through the city. The plague doesn't care about democracy, about olive trees, about sacred debates. It seeps through the cracks of marble and mud alike, cutting down men of wealth and beggars with equal cruelty. And as you lie awake that night, listening to the coughs echoing across the rooftops, you realize the most terrifying truth of all. Athens, the mighty city, has no defense against it. The days blur together in a fever haze of fear and rumor. Athens feels less like a proud city and more like a trap, its narrow alleys choking with sickness. Fires burn constantly in courtyards as families try to cleanse the air with smoke. Priests parade through the streets carrying sacrificial offerings, their chants growing hoarse. But still the coughing continues. One morning you hear shouting from the Acropolis. You climb the hill to see the spectacle. Hundreds gathered around the temple demanding answers. Some call on Athena for mercy. Others blame Pericles for trapping the people behind the city walls during war with Sparta, turning Athens into a giant pest house. Someone hurls a rotten onion at a magistrate. Another throws stones. The guards push back, but the unrest simmers like a pot about to boil over. You turn to leave and nearly stumble over a body slumped by the steps. A young woman, eyes open but empty, her hands still clutching a small wreath of laurel. Around her, people step carefully, avoiding her like an inconvenient puddle. You gag, press your cloak to your mouth, and flee. At home, the fear has seeped inside. Your wife forces you to strip off your dusty tunic in the courtyard and pour water over yourself before entering. The sickness rides on clothes, she says firmly. You don't argue. You watch her scrub your son's hands raw with soap made from ash and oil. He whines, but she doesn't relent. Her gaze is fierce. If anyone is going to keep this family alive, it's her. That night, a knock rattles your door. It's your cousin Mel, pale and sweating. "Please," he gasps. "My wife is sick. Can we stay here?" Your wife's eyes dart to yours. You freeze. To let them in risks all of you. To refuse feels inhuman. But Athens is forcing choices no human should have to make. After a long silence, your wife speaks first. "Go to the shrine. Pray there." She closes the door before you can reply. You stand in the dark, listening to your cousin's fading footsteps and feel the weight of betrayal settle like lead in your chest. The plague doesn't just rot bodies, it rots trust. Neighbors eye each other with suspicion. Friends stop visiting. Even family is kept at arm's length. And amid it all, opportunists thrive. Herbalists peddle powders of crushed snails as cures. One man offers Apollo's antidote in tiny clay vials for more obols than you earn in a month. Desperation drives people to buy anyway. But the strangest sight is this. Philosophers still debating in the Agora as if sickness were just another argument to win. You pass them one afternoon, one insisting the disease comes from angry gods, another claiming it's bad water, another swearing it's simply chance. Around them, sick men stagger and collapse, their answers written in sweat and silence. You think back to the Symposium, to the grand question of life's purpose. Tonight, the only answer is survival. Back home, you bolt the door, sit close to your wife and son, and listen to the muffled city cough itself to pieces. Athens once felt immortal, a city of marble and ideas. Now it feels fragile, a body fevered and weak. You close your eyes, praying you'll still be breathing when the sun rises. The plague isn't even done tearing through the streets when the heralds announce another decree. Every able-bodied man is to muster for a skirmish. You laugh bitterly when you hear it. Your lungs still feel heavy from the smoke of funeral pyres. And yet, the city demands you pick up a spear. Athens thrives on democracy, philosophy, and commerce, but war is its second heartbeat. You drag yourself to the muster point, a dusty square near the city gates. Dozens of men are already gathered, some hardened veterans, others barely sprouting beards. Everyone wears the same look, weary resignation. A slave hands you a long spear taller than your house and twice as heavy as your confidence. You grip it awkwardly, trying to remember the drills you half slept through years ago. The strategos in charge barks orders, his bronze helmet gleaming under the midday sun. Form ranks, shields locked, spears forward. He roars. You shuffle into place, wedged between two men who look like they actually enjoy this. Your shield is a round, clumsy disc that weighs more than your son. When you raise it, your arm trembles almost immediately. The march begins, sandals slapping the packed earth in uneven rhythm. Dust rises in clouds, clinging to your sweat, choking your throat. The countryside rolls past, vineyards stripped bare, olive groves skeletal after years of overuse. You remember when these fields fed the city? Now they look as tired as you feel. After hours of trudging, the commander halts the line near a narrow ridge. "Spartan raiding party ahead," he announces grimly. Murmurs ripple through the men. Sparta, the name alone curdles blood. Their warriors are trained from childhood, forged into machines of discipline. You, meanwhile, have spent your adulthood wrestling barley loaves and goats. The order comes. Form the phalanx. You stumble into position, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield. The line feels both claustrophobic and exposed. You can smell the man to your left, a farmer reeking of garlic and fear. To your right, a youth whispers a prayer to Ares, his voice trembling, and then you hear it, the steady thud of feet approaching, the rhythmic beat of shields struck in unison. The Spartans are close, your stomach knots. You grip your spear tighter, though your palms are slick with sweat. The commander shouts encouragement, but his voice is thin against the approaching roar. The man beside you mutters, "I should have stayed home." You almost agree. The first clash is sudden, brutal. Spears jab, shields slam, men grunt and curse. You thrust blindly, your spear scraping against bronze. A Spartan pushes forward, his eyes cold, his stance unshakable. Your shield jolts as he slams into it, the impact rattling your teeth. For a moment, you think you'll be crushed. Then the line surges. Men behind you shove, forcing you forward whether you're ready or not. You stumble, spear wobbling, shield slipping, heart hammering. The noise is deafening. Metal on metal, flesh on earth. Screams rising and falling like waves. You don't feel brave, you don't feel heroic. You just feel trapped in a human wall, praying your legs don't give out before the line does. The crush of bodies closes in, a living vice that squeezes the air from your lungs. The phalanx is less about fighting and more about enduring. A test of how long you can stay upright while the man behind you shoves. The man beside you wobbles, and the enemy in front drives forward with machine-like precision. You jab your spear into the chaos ahead. It glances off a Spartan shield with a hollow thunk. The shock runs up your arm, numbing your fingers. You pull back, thrust again, this time scraping against a bronze helmet. The Spartan barely flinches. He growls, shoving his shield into yours so hard you stagger backward. The farmer on your left grabs your shoulder to keep you from falling. You gasp, nod, and push back in. Somewhere down the line, a man screams. The cry is swallowed instantly by the roar of shields and spears. You can't see what happened. Maybe a wound, maybe a stumble, but you feel the ripple of fear spreading like cracks in pottery. The commander bellows for the line to hold. His voice sounds distant, like thunder from another valley. Your eyes burn with sweat. Your mouth is dry. Your arms ache, and your stomach twists in terror. Yet there's no leaving. That's the cruel genius of the phalanx. Your comrades' shields pin you in place. To step out is to expose them. Cowardice isn't just shame, it's betrayal. So you stay trembling, legs quivering, spear wobbling. The clash drags on, a brutal stalemate. Dust fills the air until you can barely see, coating your tongue, sticking to your sweat. The world narrows to the pounding of feet, the crash of shields, the heat of bodies pressed together like bricks in a wall. You feel less like a man and more like a cog in some ancient war machine. Then, as suddenly as it began, the Spartans pull back. Not far, just enough to breathe, to regroup. The line exhales in ragged unison. Men slump against their shields, gasping. You hear someone retching, another sobbing quietly. You lean on your spear, wondering if your legs will hold another push. The commander strides past, blood streaked across his bronze cuirass. "We held," he shouts. "Athens stands today." The men cheer weakly, raising spears, though the sound is more relief than triumph. You manage a half-hearted shout, mostly to convince yourself you're still alive. When the signal comes to withdraw, you stumble out of formation, every muscle trembling. You collapse onto a patch of grass, pulling off your helmet and gulping air. The farmer beside you sits down too, grinning with all his teeth intact. "First time," he asks. You nod. He chuckles. It gets worse. On the march back, your body aches with each step, but your mind aches more. You realize how fragile your city's glory really is. Athens boasts of democracy, theater, philosophy, but none of it survives without men like you in these shield walls, pushed into battle with little more than a spear and blind faith. As the city walls come back into view, you think tomorrow it could be another skirmish, another push, another near death. The war with Sparta isn't a chapter, it's a lifestyle, and you're trapped in it. Whether your lungs or courage can keep up or not, you limp back into Athens with the others, body aching, ears still ringing from the clash, the gates close behind you, and for a brief moment, you feel safe. But almost immediately, the talk begins. Sparta, always Sparta, their discipline, their spears, their training from childhood, the way their warriors never flinch. You hear it from soldiers, merchants, even children playing in the dust. Every victory Athens claims is shadowed by that name, whispered with grudging respect and gnawing fear. As you walk through the Agora, you overhear a debate that makes your jaw clench. Two men argue loudly. Sparta is superior. They live for war, and war is all that matters. The other snaps back. And what of our ships, our democracy, our art? Are we to throw away the gods' gifts for the sake of discipline? Their shouting draws a crowd. Athens thrives on argument, but today it stings deeper. Your neighbor Cleon joins your side, shaking his head. They talk as if they'd rather be Spartans than Athenians. Have they forgotten the plague, the trials? Even we can barely survive our own city. He spits on the ground for emphasis. The irony hits you. In Sparta, a citizen is bred to be a soldier from age 7, molded like clay into something terrifying. In Athens, a citizen like you is dragged from jury duty to a symposium to a battlefield, expected to perform in every arena. You envy neither life, but you can't shake the dread that one day the Spartan way will crush yours. At home, you find your wife weaving, her brow furrowed. She looks up, eyes scanning the bruises on your arms. "Was it Spartans?" she asks. You nod, she mutters. The city will break itself chasing them. That night, the tension spreads into the symposiums, the markets, even the temples. Men toast to Athenian glory, but then add bitter caveats about Spartan steel. Comedians at the theater slip barbs into their plays, mocking generals for fearing Sparta, yet secretly envying their discipline. You laugh along, but the humor doesn't land in your gut. The worst is when your son, playing in the courtyard, points his clay soldier at you and says, "He's Spartan, he always wins." The words slice deeper than any spear. You manage to smile, ruffle his hair, but inside you feel the shame of the city that brags of wisdom, yet trembles at the name of its rival. As you lie awake, the noise of the city muffled by darkness. You realize Athens doesn't just fight Sparta with shields, it fights them in the minds of its own citizens, where admiration and fear mix into a poison more dangerous than spears. And you wonder, how long can a city survive when its greatest enemy also lives rent-free in every Athenian's head? The very next morning, you discover Sparta isn't just a word whispered in fear. It's an obsession gnawing at every corner of Athenian life. In the marketplace, men who couldn't wrestle a goat argue about hoplite formations. At the fountain, women mutter that their husbands would rather imitate Spartan discipline than carry water. Even the philosophers are infected. You pass one group debating whether Spartan silence makes them wiser than Athenian chatter. You nearly laugh. If silence is wisdom, Athens is doomed. But the obsession cuts deeper. At the gymnasium, boys practice drills with a ferocity that looks more Spartan than Athenian. They run barefoot across the gravel, shouting in unison, "We will not break." The trainer barks at them to push harder, faster, watching. You feel both pride and unease. Athens is trying to match Sparta, but without Sparta's single-minded culture. The effort feels forced, brittle. Your neighbor Cleon corners you later in the Stoa, his face flushed with anger. "They want to make us Spartans," he hisses. "But look at us. Our city is ships and marble and voices, not sticks and scars. Do they think we'll survive by becoming what we hate?" He pounds his fist against the column. You nod quietly. But the truth is, part of you wonders if he's wrong. Maybe Athens does need a little Spartan steel just to endure. At dinner that evening, your wife drops the question you've been dreading. "If the city falls to Sparta," she says, eyes fixed on her loom, "what becomes of us?" You try to reassure her with vague words about Athenian strength and the gods' favor, but even as you speak, you hear the tremor in your own voice. She notices too. "You don't believe it," she mutters, returning to her weaving. That night, sleep doesn't come easily. You dream of standing in the phalanx again, pressed between sweating bodies. But when you look around, every face beside you is Spartan, silent, cold, unflinching. You glance down and realize your own shield has vanished. You wake with a start drenched in sweat, the echo of marching feet still pounding in your ears. Athens thrives on pride, on believing itself the jewel of Greece. But lately, that pride feels like a mask. Underneath the fear of Sparta is everywhere, shaping laws, debates, even the way children play. You realize the city isn't just at war with Sparta's spears, it's at war with Sparta's idea. And the cruel truth, some Athenians already believe that idea is stronger than their own. As dawn creeps in, you sit in the courtyard staring at your son's clay soldiers lined in neat rows. He's made the Spartans outnumber the Athenians. And the worst part is you can't bring yourself to rearrange them. By now you've learned the rhythm of the city. Speech, spectacle, shame, repeat. But nothing tests Athens' pride in free speech quite like standing in the middle of the Agora and daring to make people laugh. Comedy isn't just entertainment here. It's a weapon, a mirror, and sometimes a noose. And today you make the mistake of opening your mouth. It starts innocently enough. A crowd gathers around a street performer, juggling figs and shouting insults at passers-by. You laugh along with everyone else until someone nudges you forward. "Go on, citizen," he says. "Show us your wit." You wave him off, but the crowd chants louder. Suddenly, you're shoved onto the makeshift stage, a flat stone sticky with old wine stains and pigeon droppings. Dozens of eyes lock onto you. Your stomach twists. You try to remember a funny story, anything, and then it spills out. What's the difference between a politician and a goat? The goat at least feeds the city. The crowd erupts. Laughter bounces off the colonnades. Someone slaps their knee so hard they nearly topple over. For a moment you feel the rush. Athens laughing with you, not at you. It's intoxicating. But then the laughter shifts. A man at the edge of the crowd shouts, "Are you mocking the assembly?" Another adds, "Careful? Sounds like impiety to me." The joy drains from your face as quickly as the wine jug at a symposium. Suddenly, your harmless goat joke feels like a dagger pointed at the city itself. You stammer something about just a jest, but the hecklers keep pushing. One demands you name which politician you meant. Another sneers. Maybe he means all of them. The crowd howls. Laughter, yes, but edged, dangerous laughter. A priest passing by shakes his head and mutters about corrupting the youth. You feel the ground tilt beneath you. This is how it happens. One careless jest, one too bold laugh, and suddenly you're on trial, accused of undermining the gods, the city, the whole fragile fabric of Athens. You scramble to shift the tone. You raise your hands and shout, "Fine, fine." Maybe the goat should join the assembly. At least he listens better than half the citizens. Another ripple of laughter. The danger softens slightly. People clap. A few whistle. The moment passes, but as you step down, flushed and shaky, you realize just how thin the line is. In Athens, free speech is a badge of honor until the city decides it isn't. Every word is a gamble. Every laugh is double-edged, and you've just learned that comedy here is less about jokes and more about survival. You slink away from the stone stage, trying to look casual, but the aftertaste of danger clings to you like stale wine. The crowd has already turned its attention to the next performer, a wiry man with wild hair who launches into a tirade about how democracy is just 50 men yelling while 450 nap. The laughter is loud but nervous. You know that man is either going to be remembered as a genius or end up sipping hemlock. You retreat to the edge of the Agora, where a group of philosophers lean against the colonnade, smirking at the spectacle. One of them calls out to you, "Citizen, you spoke boldly. Care to try again, but this time with wisdom." His tone is teasing, but you catch the edge beneath it. Here, wit isn't just amusement, it's bait. You shake your head quickly. "I've had enough goats for one day." The group chuckles. One mutters, "Sensible. Shame doesn't last long, but charges of impiety do." That phrase needles at you as you wander off. In Athens, every joke carries a shadow. Aristophanes can fill theaters with outrageous plays mocking generals. Yet the wrong quip in the wrong mouth can spark a trial. Free speech here is real, yes, but it's also a trap, one you've nearly stepped into. Later, you stop at a wine stall for courage. The vendor smirks as he hands you a cup. "Saw you making jokes earlier, brave man." His eyes narrow. "Or foolish." You force a laugh, gulp the wine, and leave before he can ask which politician you were really mocking. As you walk home, voices echo from every corner, men reciting verses, women scolding children, merchants haggling, philosophers testing ideas aloud. The city is a storm of speech, words crashing into one another like waves. You realize silence here is almost impossible. Athens demands you talk, argue, shout. To stay quiet is to be invisible. To speak is to risk everything. Back at your house, your wife greets you with her usual sharp look. "You've been in trouble again," she says flatly, as if reading it off your face. You start to protest, but she waves you off. "Just remember, when you're dragged before a jury, I'll be the one feeding your son while you're busy defending goat jokes." She turns back to her loom, leaving you to stew. You slump onto a stool, head in your hands. Today you survived the stage, but tomorrow one wrong word could tip the city against you. Athens may pride itself on freedom of speech, but in truth, it feels like living inside a courtroom where every neighbor is both spectator and accuser. As night falls, you sit quietly by the hearth, resisting the urge to speak. In a city of endless words, silence feels unnatural. But for once, it feels like the only safe choice. Morning in Athens doesn't wait for your nerves to settle. The moment the sun stretches its golden fingers across the rooftops, the city awakens with the sound of jury duty. Not a letter, not a polite request. No, a messenger bangs at your door with a bronze plate stamped with your name and the mark of the court. You groan. Not again. You dress quickly, draping your hymation over your shoulder in the most respectable way you can manage. Your wife hands you a stale crust of bread and mutters something about not embarrassing the family. You've served on juries before, but today feels different. Your stomach's tight. Maybe it's the lingering shame of yesterday's goat joke. Or maybe it's just the smell of fish stew wafting up from the neighbor's kitchen. At the courthouse, the crowd is already thick. Old men leaning on sticks, young ones trying to look wise, everyone fidgeting. You're herded into a courtyard where clerks hand out little bronze Pinocchio jury tokens. You draw yours and exhale. Court 501, not the worst. The case today, a painter accusing his rival of slandering his murals by calling them ungodly. The plaintiff wears a robe stained with ochre and sweat. He looks like he's been stewing in his rage for weeks. The defendant, a smug-looking man with oiled curls and a fan. He winks at the jury. You already hate him. Once the trial begins, it's chaos in togas. The accuser shouts that his murals are tributes to the gods. The defendant claims the paintings look like drunken sheep climbing a temple. The jury laughs. The magistrate bangs his staff. You look around. This isn't justice. It's a theater. And you're part of the audience in the cast. But here's the strange part. You, an average Athenian, have real power. Your vote will determine guilt, innocence, and possibly exile. And no one, no general, no philosopher, not even Pericles himself can override it. That's the thrill. That's the trap. Because the whole system runs on ego. Jurors vote not just on truth, but on who flatters them best. A tearful plea that'll get you sympathy, a joke at a Spartan's expense. Bonus points. You've seen it before. You've done it before. Athens may be the cradle of democracy, but today it feels like a gossipy tavern with better seating. As the defendant launches into a speech about artistic freedom, your thoughts drift. You remember a friend who lost his property because a jury thought his silence was arrogance. You recall a woman, brilliant, witty, adored, sentenced to exile for calling the goddess Athena too prudish. She meant it as a joke. The jury didn't laugh. Back in the present, the vote begins. You slide your bronze disc into the urn marked guilty, not because the mural offends the gods, but because the fan-waving defendant reminds you too much of that smirking man who mocked your goat joke yesterday. Democracy, after all, is personal. The verdict is read aloud. Guilty. The smug painter's fan stills midair, his eyes blinking like he's just been slapped with a raw squid. Around you, some jurors cheer, others shrug and shuffle off toward lunch. No one cries for justice or triumph. It's just another trial, another day. But as you leave the court, that familiar sensation returns, a weight behind your ribs. You've helped decide a man's fate over a squabble about wall art. And tomorrow, it could be you standing in his place, your life balancing on the moods of 500 neighbors with crusty bread and personal grudges. You try to shake the feeling as you pass through the Agora, but it clings like dust. You catch a snatch of conversation. Two old men debating a recent trial where a fish vendor was fined for mocking Athenian virtue in a pun about eels. They can't agree on whether it was treason or comedy. Another man bellows, "That's democracy. We get to punish stupidity." He laughs, but you wince. That's the rub, isn't it? A city where everyone has a voice also means everyone has a vote on everything, on who's guilty, on who gets exiled, on who's funny and who's a threat. Later that afternoon, you run into Cleon, your neighbor, who's pacing under an olive tree with wild eyes. "Did you hear?" he blurts. "They're talking about ostracizing Mistio's cousin just for hosting a dinner with too many foreign wines." You blink. But he's barely known. Cleon nods grimly. Exactly. No allies makes him a perfect target. You both fall into silence watching a group of boys scribbling names on shards of pottery. Ostraka practicing like it's a game. You feel a chill. That's how it begins. Petty slights turn political. Gossip hardened into law. Democracy here isn't a shield. It's a knife handed to everyone and hope they aim it somewhere else. When you return home, your wife greets you with the usual. "So, who'd you ruin today?" You roll your eyes, but she's not joking. Remember when you said you wanted to help the city? She continues, hands deep in dough. You should have opened a bakery. At least the bread can't exile you. That night's sleep won't come easy. Your vote echoes in your head. Not because you regret it, but because you know how arbitrary it was. Tomorrow you could be in front of those same 500 men. Maybe they won't like your sandals or your tone or your joke about goats. You stare at the ceiling wondering, is this freedom or just another kind of cage? One where the bars are made of words and the key is popular opinion. Either way, you'll wake up tomorrow and do it all again. Jury duty, debate, judgment, applause, punishment. Athens doesn't stop. And in a city where every citizen is a judge, no one is ever truly innocent. By now, you've learned to tread carefully in Athens, watching what you say, who you offend, and even how loudly you laugh. But there's one place where you can't hide behind clever words or quiet retreat: the battlefield. The draft notice comes not with ceremony, but with a messenger pounding on your gate, breathless, dusty, and unimpressed by your startled expression. Citizen, he announces, report to Piraeus at dawn, hoplite muster. No explanation, no room for discussion. He doesn't even wait for a response before turning on his heel. Your wife says nothing as you prepare. She doesn't need to. The clatter of your breastplate and the dull scrape of your sword say everything. You try to tell your son you'll be back soon, but he just asks if he can have your sandals if you don't return. You laugh. He doesn't. At Piraeus, the sea bites through your tunic. Hundreds of other men stand in the mist, tightening straps, adjusting shields, glancing at each other with the same look in their eyes. This again. A few sing, most stay silent. You recognize Cleon, who offers a grim nod. Soon the officers bark orders, and you're loaded onto a trireme. The ship creaks low in the water with the weight of bodies, shields, and dread. The oarsmen below deck chant in rhythm, their voices rising like a heartbeat beneath your feet. No one tells you where you're going. You just row, wait, and wonder. By midday, the coast of Euboea comes into view. Rumors ripple through the ranks. Raiders, rebellion, something about unpaid tribute. No one knows for sure and no one asks. You simply line up in the phalanx, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, sweat already soaking through your tunic. Then the horn sounds. The world becomes thunder and feet and spears. You charge because everyone else is charging. You scream because everyone else is screaming. You slam into the enemy like a wall of men trying to become a single body. You don't think, you don't even feel. You endure until someone falls beside you and then another. And then the smell hits. Blood, earth, crushed grass, fear. Your shield arm burns. Your knees wobble. You can't tell if you're winning or losing. And just like that, it's over. The enemy retreats. You're alive. Barely. The walk back to the ships is slower than the charge, much slower. No one speaks, not because they're noble or stoic, but because there's nothing clever left to say when your neighbor's lying dead in a ditch with his spear still clenched in his fist. You spot Cleon limping, a cut along his jaw that oozes but doesn't bleed freely anymore. He catches your eye, gives you a shrug that says, "Could have been worse." You nod. It's the closest thing to comfort you'll get out here. Back on the trireme, you collapse onto a bench, muscles shaking, shield arm trembling like a leaf. One of the oarsmen hands you a flask of wine. You sip. It tastes like vinegar and relief. The sea breeze hits you, cool and gentle now. It smells of salt and blood and wood smoke from the villages still smoldering behind you. That's when it strikes you. This is the other side of Athenian democracy. Glory, yes, but also ashes. Your vote in the assembly might steer the ship of state, but your spear keeps it afloat. Back in the city, they'll call it a victory. They'll parade wounded men through the Agora and hang laurel wreaths over statues. But here, surrounded by broken helmets and silence, it feels more like survival than triumph. When you return to Athens days later, no one is waiting at the gate. Your wife barely looks up from the loom. She just says, "You came back thinner." Then she adds, "The boy broke your good cup. He said he wanted to drink like a soldier." You stare at the shards in the corner, unsure if you're supposed to laugh or cry. At the bathhouse, you scrub dirt from under your nails and hear two men arguing over whether the campaign was worth it. One boasts that the Spartans would have run faster. The other snorts. "Next time we'll vote to send him first." You soak quietly. No one cares what the survivors think. Later at a public shrine, you light a small offering. Not to Athena, but to the man who fell beside you, whose name you never caught. You whisper a thank you. Not aloud, of course. This is Athens. You never know who's listening. That night, as your body aches and your dreams twist with flashing bronze and dirt, you realize something painfully clear. In Athens, you don't just live in a democracy. You bleed for it. You wake up sore, stiff, and strangely proud. The city hasn't changed while you were gone. Merchants still haggle, dogs still bark at statues, and old men still argue beneath the olive trees. But you have the battlefield etched something into your bones, something permanent. You know now what citizenship really means in Athens. And it's not just voting or speaking or debating laws in the assembly. It's carrying the weight of this city on your shoulders, literally. Today, though, there's no shield in your hand, just a stylus and a fresh wax tablet, because you're due at your Dems monthly meeting. These neighborhood councils don't make grand decisions, but they run the city's machinery. Tax records, road repairs, goat registrations. Yes, goat registrations. Apparently, someone's been letting theirs wander onto sacred ground. Again, you sigh. After surviving a spear charge, the idea of debating goat permits feels absurd. But this, too, is Athens. The democracy doesn't end with the flashy speeches or the big votes. It drips into the corners of every street, every transaction. You lean over to whisper a suggestion about streamlining grain delivery in your district. The man next to you nods slowly, like you've proposed splitting the heavens. Then someone stands and accuses another neighbor of lying about his income. Gasps, shouts, accusations of dishonor. You brace for violence, but instead they call for a vote. Wax tablets out, simple, brutal, public. The accused stares straight ahead, red-faced as the verdict comes in. Guilty, a fine, and worse, the humiliation. You feel it again, that tension in your chest. Athens trusts you with a sword and a stylus, with a vote on military campaigns and your neighbor's personal worth. It's thrilling, it's terrifying, and there's no hiding from it. Later, you stop by the marketplace and see a group of boys practicing oratory, imitating great speakers. One mocks the jurors, stuffing olives into his cheeks and pretending to vote by eating them. You laugh out loud, a real laugh, not nervous or cautious. Maybe that's the final lesson. In a city ruled by citizens, even the flaws belong to everyone. Even the absurdity is democratic. You buy a handful of figs, and the seller, recognizing you, gives you a crooked smile. "You came back from the war," he says. Not a question, just a quiet acknowledgement. You nod for now. "Still planning to run for council?" he asks. You blink. You hadn't thought about it, but now that he says it, maybe. Maybe you've earned the right to shape this city with more than just your shield and your laughter. You stroll home through the winding alleys of Athens, past chipped marble steps and graffiti scratched by poets with too much wine and too few admirers. The sun lowers behind the Acropolis, turning the stones gold and your thoughts soft. You think about all you've endured, comedies, courts, hoplite ranks, and Agora squabbles, and realize you survived a full day in this brilliant, brutal city. Barely. Inside, your wife is roasting onions over a low flame. She glances at you. Still a citizen, she teases. You smirk, just barely. She hands you a bowl. You eat in silence, the taste of charred roots oddly comforting. Your son asks if he can practice his speech for the school competition. You expect something modest, but the boy stands tall, raises his hands dramatically, and launches into a scathing mock decree banning ugly sandals. It's shockingly clever. You almost spit out your food laughing. Your wife raises an eyebrow. See, you're not the only orator in the house. You ruffle the boy's hair, and something warm settles in your chest. Maybe you didn't change the course of Athens today. Maybe you just carried your weight, voted your vote, survived your trial, swung your spear, and came home with your limbs intact. Maybe that's all any citizen can hope for. As night falls, you step outside just to breathe. The streets are quieter now, bathed in flickering oil lamp light. You see neighbors chatting, a dog snoring under a stoop, someone strumming a lyre in the distance. Athens hums around you. Not perfect, not peaceful, but alive. And so are you. You head back inside, latch the door, and slip into bed. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. More jury summons, another food shortage, maybe even a Spartan raid. But tonight, you rest because you've seen the truth. In ancient Athens, democracy isn't just a system, it's a survival sport, and somehow today you played it well enough to make it home. The day fades behind you now, slipping quietly into the folds of sleep like the last whisper of the sea breeze off the Piraeus. You've done it. You faced the Agora's chaos, the court's sharp tongues, the battlefield's blur, and the weight of 100 neighbors' judgment. And you're still breathing, still standing, still barely a citizen of Athens. Let it all melt away now. No more shouts in the assembly. No more goat jokes falling flat. No more sleepless nights fearing an ostracon with your name scratched on it. Just the slow hush of a city settling into dusk. You can almost hear the distant rhythm of the triremes lulling you like a cradle. The scent of warm olives and crushed thyme still clings to the air, carried through your dreams by the memory of sunlit courtyards and stone steps under your feet. Tomorrow, democracy will rise with the sun once more, messy, glorious, flawed, and utterly alive. But for now there are no votes to cast, no shields to lift, no speeches to craft, only rest. So close your eyes. Let the soft buzz of Athenian night lull you like the breeze through an olive grove. You made it through the trials of the world's first great experiment in freedom, and you did so with wit, grit, and just enough sandals to keep you grounded. You've earned this peace. Sleep well, citizen.